It's time for EdTech Mondays, brought to you by MasterCard Foundation and CC Hub.
In the past 2 episodes, we explored 2 key questions. First, what data exists in our education system? We saw that data is generated daily from enrollment and attendance to classroom engagement. Then we asked, is this data actually being used? In fact, that was a key part of the conversation over the past 2 episodes. We heard from the state government representative how data determines and informs decisions for improved learning outcomes, including teacher placement, learning interventions, and performance tracking. If you missed the first 2 episodes, please do well to check them out on CC Hub Africa YouTube channel and Spotify EdTech Mondays Nigeria. Today, we take the conversation a step further. Beyond data and decisions, we're asking a critical question. Who is the data really serving and who is being left out? Across Nigeria, millions of learners remain underserved due to factors like geography, household income, gender, preventing access to quality teaching and learning. If education data is truly powerful, it should help us see gaps clearly and respond to them intentionally. Welcome to EdTech Mondays Nigeria, a platform where we have critical conversations about leveraging technology to improve teaching and learning. My name is Nisi Madu, Managing Partner at CC Hub, and I'm your host for our April series discussing From Data to Action, how EdTech enables smarter decisions. Today, we're talking about equity. How can data help us identify underserved learners, target interventions accordingly, and build a more inclusive education system? Now, this is because data is not just a technical tool, it is a lever for inclusion. And today, I have really great people on the show who will be having this discussion with me. And my first guest is an education consultant with over 2 decades of experience in school leadership. He has worked with educational institutions and organizations such as Cambridge University, APEN, and Dataflex, engaging educators, parents, and students. Please welcome with me Ola Okpeson. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Brilliant. And we will go to my other guests who are joining us virtually today on this episode. We have the founder of CloudNote, an edtech platform focused on improving digital access and school performance. It has impacted over 200 schools and 100,000 learners across Africa. Please welcome with me Mary Matthew. Hi Mary, you're most welcome to the show today.
Hi Nisi, thank you for having me here.
And I also have with me Iang Umoren, who is the Project Manager, Education and Skills Data at the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, ADEA. She's an education program professional with experience that spans classroom teaching methods, management of literacy programs, learning assessments, and teacher capacity development initiatives. Iang, you're most welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I also have joining us virtually, Project Director Academics, Global Shared Services at New Globe, where he leads large-scale data-driven education reforms across Africa and Asia with programs like Jigawa Unite and Bridge Liberia. His work focuses on improving learning outcomes in underserved communities through data, instructional quality, and government partnerships. Please welcome Damilola Adeni. Damilola, you're most welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Brilliant. And we'll go straight into the conversation. My first question will start with you, Iang, and then for Damilola. And the question is this: how do you use data to identify underserved communities and prioritize where intervention is most needed?
Yeah, thank you, Nisi, for that question. I think from ADEA's perspective, I would speak more broadly across, continental view. Just to mention that currently the program that I support ADEA with, working through ADEA, is aiming to support up to 30 African countries to strengthen their education data systems to improve quality data on education and skills for informed decision-making, policy planning, program implementation, monitoring, and as well as impact evaluation. So largely our support is one where we are aiming to reach over about 30 countries. And largely, we don't collect data directly, so we are supporting countries to improve the ways in which they do this. But then in our current work with the ministries, we have seen that really the problem is not largely about data collection, right? The problem here is often that countries have enough data, have data in store, but then are not using it effectively for decision making. And that is where the issues of inequity would happen, because those data points are not being leveraged for it. But then there's still the problem about shortage of data as well. Now, this is a challenge, right? But then we know that some data sets provide insight about equity issues independently. However, there is significant value in triangulating across multiple data sources. And this is some of the things that we are seeing as gaps within data systems in some of the government ministries of education data systems that we are working with. Because there is value in that triangulation that would allow you bring together data from EMIS, so the Education Management Information Systems. There's value in triangulating with household surveys, geospatial data, and even school-level administrative data to be able to map disparities across regions and across key areas of equity. And therefore, when these different indicators are leveraged, so when you think about enrollment, not independently, but enrollment connected to retention, connected to infrastructure, teacher deployment, and connectivity issues, especially with regards to EdTech use at schools, you would see that it would allow government systems more accurately identify where their areas are being underserved. And that would then allow the ministries or the government systems to be able to then prioritize and use that information to design interventions that can support the needs of those underserved areas and people, and also therefore essentially bridge those equity gaps. So essentially, for us to be able to identify underserved communities, government and ministries, so governments through the ministries of education, need to deepen the analytical component, the analytical insights that are being drawn from the data that they have. And that is also a gap that we are seeing through the ESDC program, the ESDC initiative, because we also have a lot of gaps around data analysis in terms of capacity, the human capacity within the ministry to dig deeper into their data sources to be able to triangulate and discover and identify these underserved areas. So data is essential for equity. Data is essential for quality of education as well, because it's not just equity, but then being able to have quality education that can also serve those underserved communities as a whole. That would be my contribution on that aspect.
Thank you so much, Ian. And just before we go on to Damilola, quick question. Is Nigeria part of the 30 African countries that you're working on this program with?
Yes. In fact, Nigeria is part of the first cohort of countries that we're working with on the initiative.
Thank you so much. And I think there's something interesting you mentioned there. On the previous episodes, when we're talking to representatives of the Nasarawa State Suburb, they did mention a number of different data points that they engage with, but there's a key part that you talked about here, which is household surveys. And I think that's a very important data collection category or approach that it really enables us identify underserved learners and really push towards equity things. Damilola, from your perspective now, right, how do you use data to identify underserved communities, and what specific indicators right? Tell you, help you know where learners are falling behind or what type of interventions to design?
Thank you so much for that question. I think I'll start by saying that, I started my career in education in the classroom, and I think that has shaped the way I think about data, the way I interact, and my approach to the work that I do. Just starting out, oftentimes when we talk about data, it's easy to think about figures and numbers, but I always look at data as real issues and real people that we're trying to address the solutions to. Now, speaking to how we use data, I think one of the issues I've seen in my experience, especially when it comes to equity and access, is when it comes to you asked about how we use data to determine resource allocation, equity, or even prioritizing the solutions you're providing. One of the things that we do and we do so well is for every government, be it in a state or in a country that we work with, we usually go into these places, even the most remote of places. And this particular work has given me an opportunity to even visit places, that has no access to internet connection. You have to travel well over the seas to even reach them. And in some cases, we realize that, that they are hardly ever rich when it comes to resources or even in terms of transparency. And so what we do is we conduct something called the State of Education report, where we actually look at the actual learning levels and skills of the learners in that particular state or in that particular country. We look at the entire education structure. We collect data on not just the learning levels and the foundational learning gaps that exist. We also looked at the operational data in the school, teacher gap analysis, because one of the things, I've always had, a challenge with is there are lots of people doing a lot of amazing work in education. Even before I even came into this particular space, there are a lot of people that focus a lot of attention on teacher, training, teacher development. Some focus on foundational skills, some focus on policies. A lot of amazing, work being done, a lot of amazing data out there. But what I've always been worried about is there is always the systemic transformation aspect missing, from this. And so, if you want to actually make any real difference or make any real impact in terms of, utilizing data, there are data that you get that just gives you insight into what is going on. But because we are, a technical, organization, a technical partner to the government that we work with, we focus a lot on operational data. And so we want to not only looking at, okay, what exactly is the current learning levels of the children we're going to be working with. We're looking at the school structure. What kind of nurturing environment even allows learning to take place? We look at teacher data, we look at teacher skill set, we look at teacher gap analysis. Oftentimes we realize that in a lot of we always talk about, oh, there are not enough teachers, but oftentimes we find that teachers are actually concentrated, especially in the urban areas. And whereas all the government needed to do is just to redistribute, and you can solve more than 60 or 70% of your gap without even, hiring new set of teachers. And so we go as far as trying to look at, the foundational, learning levels of the kids we're going to work with. And that helps us to design, an academic plan, a learning plan that's actually going to help improve or, bridge that foundational gap that exists. And of course, there is no one cap fits all. We always do this for every single state in Nigeria or countries like we've done in Rwanda or in Liberia. It's You have to be able to look at this data holistically. And we engage government on this, to show them this is exactly what is existing within your state. This is our plan to get you on the right track. And then we use that to then engage the government. We use that to also give insight to or even parents and stakeholder engagement. What you often find out is that there is always a gap between what we talk about out of school children. A lot of times we're realizing now that parents don't send their kids to school because they don't think learning is happening. Teachers don't come to school. We always look at all of this data put together. We try to reach the most unreachable areas. Our tech system is able to function in all of these other places. But I think I'll pause here. I'm sure there are lots of other questions that I'll be able to expand on some of these things I've talked about.
Thank you very much, Damilola. I think you've shared a number of interesting things in your response, highlighting data around the learning levels, data around teachers and availability of teachers, and basically leveraging all of this information, working very closely with government to then design targeted interventions. And yes, definitely, we would have opportunity to dig a bit deeper as we go along in the show. And now, Mr. Ola, I'm going to come to you. You work with schools and school leadership. And at the end of the day, we talk about data, we talk about learning, we talk about reaching underserved learners, and it starts at the school. And so perhaps you can share with us, from your experience, to what extent do you think that data influences school leadership and how they structure, activities in the school to be able to cater to underserved learners, or even to cater to learners in general?
Well, data is a great part of school leadership, understanding what's going on with their students and how they go about trying to bring about targeted intervention. And of course, it's your early warning system, if you will. So, for example, if you're dealing with a secondary school, we're thinking of their exit point already, as in when they're going to take their IGCSE, International General Certificate of Education, or when they're going to take their WASC exams, their WAEC exams. So the idea then becomes, what do you need to know and how early do you need to know it? That's the question. So you see, year after year I hear people say, oh, the WAEC results were not so good. And I then say to them, but when do we need to start intervention? And some people think it's, in SS1. And I say, no, it's not in SS1. It's not in JS3. It is in JS1 when they come in. So what you would have in a traditional British setting or your British Nigerian education, you'd have something called a Cat 4, so they would take that when they come in year 7, or what we would call JS1, and based on that range of assessment, they don't like to call it an exam, we just call it a battery of assessments. Based on those battery of assessments, so there'll be the verbal, there'll be the non-verbal, we'll be able to map a likelihood of what their WAEC might look like, of what their IGCSE results might look like. So the intervention can start 5 to 6 years. And if you think of that length of time in terms of targeted interventions, be it for their reading level, be it for their maths, be it for, their reading comprehension, because of course your reading age is different from your reading comprehension age. When you have all this data, this is what informs how you're going to go about it with the students, with the parents, with the teachers. And then sometimes, as you can realize, it's about also, as you mentioned before, it's about the gaps within the teachers and how you bridge those gaps so that they can also deliver what they need to, so that all the progress that they need to make will be made.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us might have experienced it where when you have to write the WASC exams, or what we call WAEC, intervention starts in SS3, and that's when there's all of the there's extra lessons and all of that to make sure that people can students can pass. But like you said, that is far too late, and we need to start way ahead. Also, one thing that has been ringing through all across our last 2 episodes this month, and we're hearing as well on this 3rd episode this month of April, is that, and I think Ian, you referenced it as well when you started, is that it's not necessarily just about collecting the data. We collect the data, but then what do we do with it? That is the key thing that we need to address, and that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Mary, we'll come to you. Now, you mentioned, in your introduction, you work with 2,000 schools. Talk to us about how your platform enables these schools not just to collect data now, but to be able to draw insights that enable them to effectively target interventions that improve learning outcomes? And maybe you can color it for us a little bit as well when it has to do with, understanding what percentage of underserved learners they might have or where learners might be falling behind.
CloudNote has an EdTech platform supporting over 2,000 schools already across Africa. Our focus goes beyond just digitizing the schools, but we also focus on simplifying how they capture and use information. So from attender, because sometimes this data starts with, student doesn't just drop, like they don't just drop a performance. It starts with science, rather. It starts with science. So from attendance level, you should be able to monitor how they come to school. So we track from attendance level the lateness. If a child is now coming late, all of a sudden this child comes to school, for example, comes to school as early as 8. And now the child is coming to school from 8 a.m. We raise a flag on it. From attendance reports, the schools are able to identify that these students are now coming to school late and they can take actions immediately. Then there are cases where students could be absent, maybe for some days or for some weeks. We're able to bring this to the school notice. This person has been absent in the school. So person in this class has been absent in the school. And by doing so, data become more meaningful rather than just raw informations where at the end of the day, they can't really act on them because the data doesn't make much meaning. So we don't focus on building beautiful dashboards where they come and they are seeing 1,000 learners, 200 teachers, etc. So we focus on interpreting those information so that they can further use them, apply them in their day-to-day activities. They can act on them, make decisions with them, and see where a child needs support, a child that is gradually dropping. If they need certain support, they know what kind of support to actually give to the children. So there was a pilot program we did 2 years ago with the Rivers State Universal Basic Education Board. And the data we were able to gather for them was much more deeper than what we do with the private schools, because now we are taking into cognizance infrastructures, because we know they need this data for decision making. They should be able to know infrastructure-wise, what infrastructure are these schools lacking? What do they need? What support does the students need, the teachers need? So we're very detailed when we're capturing information. And that was able to help them during that period of pilot program. They were able to gain more insight as to what really happens within the school, from admission to attendance to learning in the classroom to examination to infrastructure. So we move beyond just showing them spreadsheets, showing them beautiful raw data on the dashboard, to interpreting those data so that it can further enhance their day-to-day decision making. So at the end of the day, the overall performances of the students can be improved. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Mary. And I think key things there is, one, technology is an enabler, not just in collecting that data, but in enabling the school leaders draw insights from that data to be able to target interventions. And to what it is you've said, the ultimate goal, ensuring that truly our students are learning when they are in the classroom. As we wrap up today's conversation, one thing is clear. Data is not just about measurement, it's about visibility. And when learners are not visible in data, they're often excluded from decisions, resources, and opportunities. The real opportunity before us is to build systems where data does more than just track performance. It actively drives equity. To our viewers, we'd love to hear from you. How do we ensure that education data in Nigeria truly works for every learner and not just those who are easiest to reach? Share your thoughts with us on social media or via SMS or WhatsApp at 0703 165 0809 or call 0706 402 0742. Remember, you can continue this discussion on our WhatsApp and Telegram channels, EdTech Mondays Nigeria. And don't forget, past episodes are available on Spotify, EdTech Mondays Nigeria, and YouTube CC Hub Africa. Your feedback will help shape the conversations we host and the policy dialogues we advocate for. Until the next episode, I'm your host, Nisi Madu. Bye for now.
Tech Mondays, brought to you by MasterCard Foundation and CC Hub.